Classical Spookfest, an annual descent into the terrifying hellscape of classical music. I'm your host, Willy's White, and with me are Tiffany Boo and Kensho Watanabe. Today we'll hear the true crime story of Carlo Gesualdo, Prince of Venosa. And finally, we'll discuss the true crime genre with author and YouTube deathfluencer Caitlin Doughty. But first, we like to start with our prelude segment in D minor. So, Tiffany, what do we have today?
For this week's prelude segment, we're once again plumbing the depths of that sordid catacomb that is Classic FM, as we look at their list of 23 petrifying phrases to tell a classical musician this Halloween. Well, why don't we round robin this? I'll start off, shall we?
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay, so number 1. Hey, they said the overhead lockers were too full, so we've just put your cello in the hold. Hope that's okay.
Right. So this refers to cellists who fly on planes. And,
or anybody.
Well,
musician, really. Because cellos don't fit in the overhead bins anyway.
But it's cello specific here. Yeah, they don't fit in the overhead bins.
Yeah.
I heard a story, and I think that it's actually not true, but I did just hear this. So cellists, when they fly with their cello, they buy an extra ticket for the cello so that, the cello gets its own seat. I heard that there was somebody flying and they wouldn't let them on the plane with the cello because the cello did not have proof of COVID vaccination.
Oh, no way.
Yes.
That's crazy. That's worse than, what was it? I think Lynn Harrell had an issue where they stopped allowing cellos to accrue miles.
Oh, boy. That is petrifying.
All right. Next. Will, how about you read the next one?
All right, number 2 is, the practice rooms are all taken. Which, I mean, when I was at Indiana University, like every practice room was always all taken. There was no time when they weren't all taken. So what are you going to do? Very scary for a music student. Kensho, number 3.
Hey, Will, you can transpose by sight, can't you?
And this refers to a lot of like accompanists. It's like you're going in, you're playing for a singer most often, and the piece that you're playing is in B flat. Usually this would be like a Broadway thing. This is like more of a musical theater thing than.
I know of a Pops orchestra that shall remain nameless that there were multiple instances in which sometimes the conductor would just announce at the concert that they have to switch this into B flat major or some crazy key, and then would just launch into it.
Yeah, I mean, again, on Broadway, this used to be par for the course. Like, this used to be part of the musician's apparatus, that you would just have to know how to transpose things. These days, because of, Finale and Sibelius and all of the notation software where transposition is just one click away, now they can just prepare parts in multiple keys, for multiple people. So you don't come across this one quite as much.
You don't come across this next one very much either, but let's go with it since we recently did a segment that might be topical. Hey man, I'll drop your violin bow back to you in a bit. You're supposed to wash it with soap, right? And of course the picture underneath is of, I don't know, it might actually, I don't know whether it's from Violin Torture, but it's certainly in the same vein. It's like somebody washing a unstringed violin with soap and water in a kitchen sink.
It's pretty scary. All right, number 5. Hope you're ready for your solo tonight. There's this tradition at, I guess it's King's College, Cambridge. So this is, which does the big Christmas 9 lessons and carols service every year. And it starts off with a boy, a boy soprano singing Once in Royal David City, totally solo. And apparently they prepare 3 boys every year to do this solo. And they choose the boy the second before the recording is about to start. And this goes out like across the world, BBC World Service. It's like one of the most listened to things. And it's just so that the boy doesn't have time to get scared. They just have to do it. All right, so the next one here is, you can read alto clef, right? And we have a picture of a
really good jack-o'-lantern
carved into a pumpkin, very, very
very
expertly,
nice.
I have to say. Yeah. Yeah, alto clef
Is this the
scary
scary
people.
one? Isn't like tenor
No,
clef a little
embrace
bit
the alto
scarier?
clef, everybody. You know,
Yeah, or
violas are your
soprano clef,
friends.
God forbid.
Soprano clef is genuinely terrifying, and mezzo soprano clef, and even baritone clef. Those I am afraid.
Yeah,
of.
those are actually scary. Alto clef, come on.
Well, this is for the normies, Kensho.
Well, the shape of the alto clef is the same, so how do you know what clef this is?
That's very true. Yeah, that's just a C clef.
All right, the next one is, hey, I heard your old music teacher is coming tonight.
Has this ever happened to you?
I would welcome that.
Yeah, I think that would be okay for me,
Sounds
too.
very nice. Not scary, Classic FM.
I mean, unless they have passed.
Oh, well, yeah. If it was the shadow of your former music teacher, then
That
yeah,
would be a little spooky.
that would be
I
spooky.
have to say.
That's much better. Yeah.
Number 8, just randomly shout intonation at them. And actually, I think the accompanying image on this is way funnier than the actual item on the list. The
Tweet.
photo is of a tweet that says, from somebody named Big Bass Energy, that says, for $5, I'll comment intonation on your ex's recital on YouTube.
That is funny. That's actually pretty good. All right, the next one is the page turner just dropped out. You can turn your own music though, right?
Did you guys page turn ever for like work study or like?
I turned pages during for a performance of Bill Murray and a piano trio that he had recruited once to perform. And that performance ended with me waltzing on stage with Bill Murray.
Whoa.
One of my best personal stories.
That's awesome. Wow. What is this next one? It says the music's in 12/8, keys in D flat minor, and the concert's in an hour. My question is, why have you agreed to such a concert? But
Or why didn't you know?
also 12/8, is that scary?
12/8 doesn't really frighten me so much. Depends on the tempo, of course. D flat minor though. Like, come on, people. Make it C sharp minor. It's a lot easier.
Number 11. I like this one. Watch out for that modulation over the page, and there's a comic, but the point is that sometimes, you know, you're playing along and then you turn the page and there's a key change right at the top of the page. And that really is something to kind of like make you jump out of your skin just a little bit if it's not expected or not written, frankly, notated correctly at the bottom of the previous page, right?
Spooky publishers.
Mm-hmm. All right, here's the next one here. Heard your ex is coming to your recital tonight. Cool that you guys are still friends. And of course, it's the famous Homer Simpson receding into the bushes gif.
Well, for conductors, it's like, heard your ex is playing in your orchestra tonight.
All right.
You can conduct and play the bassoon, right?
Is this a
like
thing?
at the same time? Like, wait, what does this mean?
I've known people to conduct from the bassoon. I have a friend who's a Baroque bassoonist in Portland who has led, like Vivaldi concerto from the bassoon.
That actually gives me that's a segment that we should probably maybe do, is talking about play directing and whether or not we believe that's a real thing.
I'd be happy to talk about it. I believe it's a real thing. I think there's much controversy there, but yeah, I'd love to hear your take about that.
Okay. Number 14. This is very modern, I guess, and has never happened to me, but you've gone viral.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a spooky thing. God.
Well, no, it depends on what you've gone viral for. I mean, there's any number of people who go viral for things that they have no desire to be associated with.
Yeah. All right. The next one is similar to one we've had before. It's randomly shout vibrato. I don't know why that. I don't know if I quite understand that.
I don't know.
Oh, maybe isn't there that famous
The
Celli
Celli clip? Yeah, where he just shouting at the viola's vibrato. Or is
I think he just shouts violas. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't really get this. Although too much vibrato can be a little bit of a scary thing.
Remember that time you said you could sing in 5 languages? I need a favor. Name me a song or an opera where you have to sing in 5 different languages. Is it just a program or something? Or...
I guess this would be.
I feel like okay. So like the first 12
I know.
were good. I think they're just kind of running out of.
We're stretching it out here. Yeah.
Okay. Next.
Hey man, saw the review last night. Don't listen to them. I think you sounded great.
I like that one. That's pretty funny. All right. The next one is offer a singer a cough lolly randomly. So I guess that's our equivalent of a cough drop in this country. Why don't we have cough drops on sticks? We should have cough lollies. Yeah, that would be.
Or just go up to them and ask them if they're marking.
That's more just that's just like rude. I don't know if that's petrifying.
Yeah, that's just kind of rude, isn't it? Yeah. Me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
damn, our sopranos just pulled out for Boris Godunov tonight. You're fluent in Russian, right? Why am I getting the Russian, like the language ones?
Language ones, yeah. I mean, is that petrifying? Like, I mean, you just say no, or if you are fluent in Russian, then great. Then it's your big day.
Like some of these obviously come from a sort of and I mean this in like the least derogatory way possible, like a high school mindset of playing music, where like you practice for probably the whole semester on a program, and then you're sort of all revved up about your solo and putting yourself back into that mindset of like you don't want to be in the spotlight, but you do still want to perform, but you still want to do well, but you don't actually want to do it, but it's a little, I don't know, it's like slightly nostalgic for me in a way.
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay. The sound engineers say they've had some trouble tonight, but I told them you could just sing a bit louder. There's nothing harder than having your body be your instrument. I can't hardly think of anything more difficult than that.
Oh, this next one is funny. It's just good luck at the concert tonight. And the assumption would be that it's a day that you don't plan that you have a concert. That would spook me if somebody said that.
Also a good April Fool's joke.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, 22, almost there. Hey, thanks for letting me borrow your violin. That post bit inside is supposed to rattle around, right?
That's funny. If people don't play a string instrument, they don't know that, like, in between the what do you even call them? The top and the bottom wood panels of the violin, there is this little stick that connects them called the sound post. And if your sound post like gets dislodged, such that it would be rattling around inside the body of the string instrument, like that's a bad
thing. That's not good.
Yeah, the sound post is not glued to the top and the bottom, and the only thing that holds it upright is tension. Yeah. Okay, last one. Hey, just seen the video online. Don't worry, just happens to the best of us. Your career will recover. Again, does this happen?
Again, that's just rude.
Yeah, right?
It's not petrifying.
Who is saying all these things? It's terrible.
Yeah, well, listeners, get at us with your better scary things to tell a classical musician this Halloween, such as we're skipping an episode of the Classical Gabfest. But don't worry, we're not. That just about does it for this week's Prelude segment, but before we wrap up, we'd like to remind our listeners that we do periodic listener-generated Name That Tune rounds. So we invite you to try and stump us. Check our show notes, where you'll find a link to the form where you can upload a 30-second clip of an unidentified piece of classical music for us to try to identify. And with that, now it's time for something a little different, as the Classical Spookfest presents the first episode in our true crime spin-off podcast, Gesualdo.
I'm standing in a courtyard in the city of Venosa, looking up at an imposing castle wall. It's a windy day, and the air is chilly. Some people think the air here is bad for your health. Venosa's been through a lot. 100 years ago, its population stood at 12,000. Then the plague came. Half the town died. Now, in the year 1611, there's barely 7,000 people living here. There's a moat that separates the forecourt from the castle gates. Not many people go in or out of the castle these days, but a few do. Oh, signore, signore, scusi, signore.
Yes?
Signore, you're about to go into the castle, yeah?
Yes.
What's your name, signore?
Giuseppe?
Giuseppe, you're about to cross the moat and go into the castle, yeah?
I'm not sure I can talk to you.
Well, it's just that not many people go in or out, and I noticed that you were just about to go in, and you're one of the few visitors. So what's going on in there? What are you up to?
I'm so sorry. I just don't think that I'm allowed to speak with you.
I couldn't get much from Giuseppe, but about 30 minutes after he passed through the castle doors, I could hear something from the east tower. What's that? Is that someone being beaten? So who's inside that castle? Well, you might think it's a king, but Venosa is part of the kingdom of Naples, and Naples is a 4-day walk from here. But that barely even matters. The King of Naples? That's Felipe II, and he lives in Spain. Venosa is a principality, and the guy inside the castle, he's the prince. His name is Carlo Gesualdo. But Don Carlo isn't a normal prince. In fact, being a prince is more like a sideline for him. Don Carlo's main focus in life is music. He's a lutenist, a singer, and a composer of some of the most striking music ever written. But that's not all. Carlo Gesualdo, Prince of Venosa, is a murderer. I'm Gili Bianco, and this is Gesualdo. In the town of Venosa, you hear a lot of things about the prince, but hardly anybody sees him. Excuse me, when's the last time you saw Carlo Gesualdo?
Don Carlo. I think he's been locked inside the gates of that castle for 3 or 4 years now.
Do you even know that he's still alive?
Oh, yeah. We can hear him.
You can hear what?
We can hear the screams.
Why do you think he's screaming?
That's not something I will know about.
Is his wife up there with him?
His wife? No, she stays as far away from Venosa as she can.
Why is that?
Well, wouldn't you? Plus, he's got that witch locked up in there with him. He doesn't need to go anywhere.
Witch?
Yes, the one who made him drink her blood.
We'll talk more about the witch later. But it's the sounds coming from the castle that I want to talk about now. And not just the screams. I want to talk about the music. If you spend enough time in Venosa, you'll eventually hear musical strains spilling over the castle walls. Most of it is faint, just loud enough to be audible. But it's there. I decided to go to the church of San Filippo Neri, just outside the castle gates, to see if I could find out more about the music that flowed out of the castle tower. Well, thanks so much for talking to us today, Padre Stefano. The first thing I want to ask you is, do you ever hear the music coming out of the East Castle Tower?
Oh, yes, all the time.
Yeah, well, they say that the prince is a musician himself. Is that right?
Yes, he has assembled several of the finest singers in Italy and rebuilt the court music in Venosa.
And have you heard his music that he has actually written himself?
Yes.
And what do you think of his music?
Well, I haven't gotten a chance to listen to it very carefully since I work very diligently on my tasks here and hearing it from the window.
But you said that you hear it on pretty much a daily basis coming over the castle wall.
Yes, but I am also not able to discern if it's the prince's music or some other music. So I'm not sure.
Uh-huh. And are you a music lover yourself?
Yes, of course.
So you have opinions about music, generally speaking.
Yes, but I like to keep them to myself.
Padre Stefano's dissembling about Don Carlo's music? I get it. His stuff is weird. And I mean weird.
Yeah, so why do you think he writes the kind of music that he does?
That's Errico Benfiglio, one of our reporters.
Well, I'm sure there are many reasons.
Such as...
Well, Don Carlo has had some disturbing experiences in his life that maybe he draws that inspiration into his music.
Well, disturbing experiences. I mean, we've heard some things. Do you think that he has something to be guilty about, perhaps?
No, I don't want to comment on who's guilty or not. This is the family's business, so you can probably find that in the records if you'd like. But I don't care to comment on other people's business.
Padre Stefano wouldn't say what the Prince of Venosa has to be guilty about, but it stands as a matter of public record. On the night of October 16th, 1590, Carlo Gesualdo murdered his wife, Donna Maria d'Avalos, and his wife's lover, Fabrizio Carafa, the Duke of Andria, when he caught them in flagrante delicto in his own bedchamber at the Palazzo San Severo in Naples. But Don Carlo didn't just catch them in the act, he engineered their tryst that night. He knew full well that his wife was amorously involved with the Duke. He had found that out from his uncle, who was offended because Donna Maria had rebuffed his own advances. Now, this gets complicated because Donna Maria was actually Don Carlo's first cousin. The uncle who had made advances on Donna Maria, he was her uncle too. Don Carlo had told his wife that he would be away on a hunting trip that night. He waited for the Duke to come to her, and after their lovemaking was underway, he pounced.
Yes, I think I can find what you're looking for.
That's Sister Josefa. I'm in Naples at the Cathedral of San Domenico Maggiore. Sister Josefa looks after the records here. Sister, what happened on the night of October 16th, 1590, at the Palazzo San Severo?
According to the official inquest on this night, Don Carlo Gesualdo, Prince of Venosa, came upon his wife, Donna Maria Gesualdo, and the Duke of Andria in an upper bedchamber, in flagrante delicto. The prince or one of his men-at-arms shot the Duke with an arquebus, and the prince himself stabbed the Duke and Donna Maria with a pointed steel weapon or weapons several times in many diverse regions of the body.
Is it true that the prince dragged the bodies onto the steps of the palazzo so that they could be seen by everyone in the town?
According to the official inquest, the investigators found the bodies in the room in which they had been slain.
Well, we've heard from many people that Donna Maria may have recently given birth to a second child before the night of these murders, and that this child was said to bear a striking resemblance to the Duke of Andria. Did Don Carlo also murder this child?
Let me see here. No, that's not accounted for in the record book.
Did Don Carlo commit a crime?
That's Errico again.
No charges were pressed by any of the families involved.
But what about you? Do you think that what he did was wrong?
Only God can make such a judgment.
Sometimes life comes at you fast, and being noble, even that's no guarantee that you won't end up in trouble. That's why the Bank of Venice offers its customers that rarest of assets, peace of mind. Through wars and plagues and famines and floods, you can rest assured that the Bank of Venice will see you through and ensure that your money is invested in a wide range of mercantile endeavors. That's the Bank of Venice promise. The Bank of Venice is offering a special deal to listeners of the Gesualdo podcast. Just go to your local branch with the promo code MADRIGAL, and you'll get a gold ducat when you open a new account. After the murders, Don Carlo married again, but things with his second wife, Eleonora d'Este, were rocky from the start. She accused her husband of mistreatment, abuse, and infidelity. There was even the assertion that Don Carlo had been placed under the spell of a witch. And that's what I wanted to know more about. Who was this witch? And was she actually locked inside the castle with Don Carlo? I knew that there was one person who was sure to know.
I am Don Antonio Frigento, counselor to the Viceroy of Naples.
I caught up with Don Antonio inside his carriage as he was traveling back from Naples. Don Antonio, I believe that in August of 1603 you received a report from Cesare Staebano, baronial governor to the house of Gesualdo. Is this correct?
It is.
And what was the subject of this report?
The report concerned witches and sorcery in the house of Gesualdo, and an update on the state of the trial against Aurelia del Rico and Polisandra Pezzella.
And who is Aurelia del Rico?
Signora Aurelia is the consort of Don Carlo Gesualdo, Prince of Venosa.
So, not his wife?
No, not his wife.
And of what offense did she stand accused?
Witchcraft and sorcery.
And was this accusation proven?
Yes, it was.
How do you go about proving such a thing? Do you just put her in water and see if she floats?
Nothing so crude. We carried out a thorough inquisition and received testimony from several witnesses as to the love potions that Signora Aurelia gave to Don Carlo in order to bewitch him.
Love potions? What was the nature of these love potions?
I would perhaps prefer not to say.
Well, yes, but you've got the report right there. Would you perhaps mind reading the pertinent passages?
According to the report, that the aforementioned Aurelia made the prince drink her menstrual blood is established by 4 witnesses to extrajudicial confessions by the defendant.
Oh, wow. Okay. What about Polisandra Pezzella? She's also named in the Inquisition. Who was she?
Polisandra was a local sorceress, known to have had secret conversations with Signora Aurelia.
And do we know what the nature of those conversations was?
According to the report, that the aforementioned Polisandra had told her that if she would take a slice of bread and place it inside her nature, and after it was saturated with her seed, she will give it to the prince to eat with sauce, is established through an extrajudicial confession by the defendant, and also through the deposition of the self-same Aurelia given intrajudicially and without torture.
And you said that the accusations of witchcraft against Aurelia had been proven. What was her punishment?
To be imprisoned for life in the castle at Venosa.
The castle where Don Carlo is in residence?
The same.
Thank you for your time, Don Antonio.
Certo.
The report from this Inquisition is just one of the many, many official records documenting the life of Carlo Gesualdo. In fact, there are probably more documents about him than just about any other human alive today. But those are just documents. It's obviously important for Don Carlo to be able to tell his own story, and we have reached out to him in every way we could. We've written letters to him personally, to his chaplain, to his baronial governor, even to his son, Emanuele, none of which were answered. But I still have questions. Had Donna Maria given birth to a second child? Had Don Carlo committed infanticide? And what about the murders we know he committed? He was never formally accused of a crime, but did he feel guilty over them? And now that he was holed up in the castle at Venosa, was he employing local youths to beat him as a penance for his sins, as some of the town folks we interviewed told us off the record? And maybe most importantly, was the provocative, eerie music that he had been writing in the decades since 1590 a reflection of his personal anguish? There was only one way to find out. Okay, so I'm outside the castle at Venosa, and it's sunrise, and the castle doors are just about to open to receive the morning deliveries. So I'm hiding on the back of an ox cart under a tarp, and I'm just going to hope for the best. Okay, I'm inside, and now I'm standing in front of the Eastern Tower, where we know Don Carlo maintains his private apartments. I'm going to go up the stairs. Okay, this has to be the door. Don Carlo, Signore. This is Gili Bianco, the person who's been writing you those letters. I was wondering if I could ask you some questions. That's next time on Gesualdo. Gesualdo is a production of the Classical Gabfest Network. It's produced, reported, and narrated by me, Gili Bianco, with reporting assistance from Enrico Benfiglio. Special thanks to Padre Stefano of the Chiesa di San Filippo Neri in Venosa, Sister Josefa at the Cattedrale di San Domenico Maggiore in Naples, and Don Antonio Frigento at the office of the Viceroy of Naples. All the music you heard in this episode was written by or based on music by Don Carlo Gesualdo, Prince of Venosa. Now that we've heard episode 1 of Gesualdo the podcast, we're going to engage in a little discussion about the story of Gesualdo and more broadly about the current vogue for true crime and what it says about our society. Here to discuss these things and so much more is friend of the Spookfest, Caitlin Doughty. Caitlin's YouTube channel, Ask a Mortician, is a fan favorite, and she's also the author of 3 New York Times best-selling books, including her recent children's book, Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? Big Questions from Tiny Mortals About Death. Caitlin, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me, and a completely revamped podcast, a true crime podcast of the highest order.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do now. We're true crime podcasters.
I mean, when you're so good at it, why? I'm flabbergasted. Why would you just,
Yeah, what's with this composing thing, Will?
I know.
It would be like if I was just really good at BMX biking.
Are you
not?
not?
And it's like, no, I am not. But like, what if I had like a savant gift for something that was not my passion? Is it your job to pursue it? This is the question we are asking today.
Yeah. Well, we're asking a bunch of questions today, and one question I wanted to ask you is, you're the founder of this organization called the Order of the Good Death, of which I may or may not still be a member. I don't know. If I am, I'm not a member in good standing.
Once you went through the blood ritual, so yeah. Once a member, always a ritual, always a member.
So, okay, let's start off with this. What is the good death, and where does this concept come from? Because I want to tie this into the idea of true crime, which is definitely not about the good death most commonly, and sort of see where these concepts run up in tension against each other.
In some ways, the good death is a reaction to things like true crime, because what gets the headlines, the press, the cultural discussion, but bad deaths, murders of beautiful young women and horrible tales and things like the pandemic, which has been an interesting transition for me because during the pandemic, I've had several people, well-intentioned, say, "This is your time. Everybody's talking about death." And I'm like, well, first of all, like, woo. And second of all, it's not the type of death that I usually deal with because where I live is in this place of the common, average, everyday death. And there are all sorts of problems with just obtaining a simple good death in our culture. And in some ways, I think true crime not necessarily distracts from that conversation, but you certainly see a whole bunch of that represented more than just my grandmother was 75 and she had ovarian cancer and she died on hospice and she couldn't get such and such services delivered to her home, and that was a problem, but ultimately insurance paid for part of it. And then when we went to the funeral home, like, that's not sexy. None of that narrative is sexy the way that true crime is sexy. And so getting people to be excited about mundane deaths, about the deaths that you most likely will not be murdered by your podcast host. You won't be murdered by your co-host in some dramatic, triangle of revenge. You're going to probably die in your bed of some sort of long-term disease in your 80s. Statistically, that is what's going to happen. So as fun as true crime is, it's sort of, in a way, kind of antithetical to the discussions about the good death.
And yet, you do toy with the true crime genre in your own output. I mean, you were recently here in Seattle. We got to hang out for like a month. It was totally rad and awesome in every way. And one of the videos that came out of that was this look at a case from the early 20th century with sort of, high status, high class young white women who were lured by this terrible quote unquote doctor who like starved them for months on end and they ended up dying. So that's sort of a true crime thing, but you seem to go so much deeper. And I wonder if that's sort of, what's the tension that you find there in your own work, and how do you get around some of the traps maybe that true crime can fall into?
That is a fantastic question and an excellent call out. You are absolutely right. That video that we recently spent months on does have a lot of overlap with true crime. Absolutely. And I think, well, first of all, in thinking about what makes true crime compelling, this is the concept that has launched 1,000 think pieces, right? Is why do young women like true crime? Why do these people like true crime? Why does your turtle like true crime? And for me, I there's some that I buy and some that I don't, but like at the end of the day, if it's done right, it's good storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
It's fundamentally good storytelling, and that's what we like as humans, right? We are a culture that is built on stories about ourselves and stories about the bad among us and the conflict among us and the good among us who are brought down by the bad among us, but ultimately will they have revenge? That's what makes good storytelling. And so for me, the reason that I would use the framework of these young sisters being basically murdered over a long period of time by a wellness doctor who possibly murdered, 30, 40 other people. And that's an interesting story. That is the story. That's the gateway drug. That's the framework that grounds you, that grabs you. You can follow it all the way through. And we've really found that videos that do follow kind of a singular story just are much more effective videos and do much better because we are following one dramatic story arc, often with our corpses and malfeasance and crime and all of these things involved. But for us, there's so many people doing true crime, so many people, to the point that it can be so flawlessly and easily parodied by yourself. We're absolutely in no way trying to compete in that space. So the reason for us to do it is to take that framework of an interesting story and really find purpose. We don't do any videos that don't have a central purpose. And for us, really, the interesting part of it was this strange relationship she had with a funeral director, and the fact that this funeral director was at the absolute vanguard of the early American funeral industry, and how it really represents how the early American funeral industry was influenced by capitalism, influenced by greed, influenced by, these sort of sinister forces, and how that might reflect on our industry today. And then also just trying to, this is so sort of silly, but not silly, it's important, but the trope of like seeing people as people and individuals, which I do absolutely understand the criticism of, and it's sort of why I don't listen to funny true crime podcasts. I know they're incredibly popular and I get their appeal, but it doesn't always feel like the humor is punching up necessarily. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you're taking the genre and the aspects of it and instrumentalizing it to further your aims, which happen to have a lot of topic overlap with the content that is produced under the true crime banner. But you're going for this positive message about how we should view death and dying. And if you're able to, like I said, instrumentalize the interest and storytelling and maybe a tad bit of the titillation, but not just exploit that for its entertainment value, but to elevate it to more of an edutainment level.
Right. What we wouldn't do is this woman was murdered by her husband in this grisly way.
Mm-hmm.
Because that, who hasn't been murdered by their husband in a grisly way? It seems like if you watch or listen to true crime, right?
That's right. You listen to Gesualdo the podcast.
Exactly. And to be able to get into this story about wellness culture and about how they basically starve to death, and how I do think wellness culture in many ways is death denial. And it is an attempt to extend your life and to make yourself healthier, but at a cost that is far too high in some cases. And being able to examine those kind of cultural, because that story wouldn't be there without death denial. Mm-hmm. And so at the base of everything I do is the act of death denial, and is how these things develop, how zombies develop. Where do vampires come from? We're working on a video on vampires now. Where do these myths come from? Surprise, corpses and death denial. It all kind of leads back to the same place as far as we're concerned. And I think where some true crime suffers is, what's the point? Really excellent true crime can really tell a story about a certain area of the country, or about police systems and why they're broken, or about why certain families can't talk about certain things. So really elegantly done crime reporting has those whys. And when there's so many people trying to churn out content and trying to ride this wave, some of them you're just I'm missing the why. I get that this woman was horribly murdered and then her sister tried to cut, I get it. I get the story, but if there's no why, it sort of starts to feel like nothingness, just popcorn.
I guess there's a moral obligation that storytellers have, which is to answer that question of why. It's not just to tell the story or to uncover something that people didn't know. It has to be more than that. And that I'm a fan of not true crime, but fictionalized podcasts. I enjoy those just because I don't necessarily have to answer the question of why you're telling the story. It's fun to make up, it's fun to tell, and there's no kind of moral obligation to your subjects per se. I wonder if maybe let's get back to Gesualdo here. What ought we to do with our parody of a true crime? What do you think of the story of Gesualdo, first of all, now that you've heard a sort of salaciousized version of it? And where ought we to go? And maybe in a broader sense, I wonder how you seek out the stories that you want to tell. Is there a deep well of them that you're just weeding through and trying to get through all of them, or do you search for them in some way?
At this point, we are making videos that are 50 minutes long, an hour long. Yeah. So a story has to offer a lot. And I think that part of what makes a really good story is when it just keeps going. We did a small video for our group that is about Crescent Lake, which is on the Olympic Peninsula. And it was about a woman who her husband murdered her, surprise, surprise, and he put her in this lake and she turned to adipocere, or soap, basically. It's a cottage cheesy substance because she was so cold and so well preserved at the bottom of this lake. And she was down there for about 3 years until they found her. A compelling story. We have a completely a bonkers preserved body and a murder. This is a good story, but it's not a 50-minute story. Mm-hmm. It's not a story that takes us up and down and in and out, and then this happens to the dead body, and then the culture reacts this way, and then the funeral industry gets involved, and then the death culture of this culture comes in, and that is in conflict with this one. And it really has to take us on that journey to want to do that. And as far as Gesualdo, I think that he kind of tiptoes close to that line, because the tale of this man who goes into a rage and murders his intimate partner and her lover, that's sort of tale as old as time in a lot of ways, right? And even the extra stab wounds are something that you would only do if you have anger. Like it's not a quick killing, an expedited killing just to get it done. He went back because he had a specific kind of anger, whether he didn't want to be cuckolded, where he didn't want to be embarrassed, whether it would have been bad for him, whether he genuinely loved her, that we cannot know. But that kind of murder in some ways is tale as old as time. But once you get into the witchcraft and then for years later, he was being beaten himself because he had these demons, and is it actually a psychiatric issue? There are all these ways that you can go down that actually, can we talk about historical witchcraft there? And what things about the culture at the time would have even led to accusations of witchcraft? Can we talk about how there wasn't obviously psychiatric or mental health treatment, and would he have benefited from that, and what that might have looked like? So it's sort of the later part of his story that I find really compelling, and that there's so many different angles that you could go down and really explore the culture around him that supported him and made him.
Something I appreciate about your content is that you do let the content dictate the form. And I think that this is all also tied to like the economic model that you use, where you crowdsource your support from Patreon, for example, rather than producing for something like a Netflix. Because when you say like, you're looking for these stories where there's an onion and you can peel back the layers over and over and over again. Look, there have been some true crime like TV shows on Netflix or whatever where there ain't that much there, and yet it's like a 10 episode series. And they just stretch it. They repeat themselves, over and over again. But, I guess that the economics demand that. Whereas like, you're putting stuff out there for people who like and admire your content and enjoy it and want to engage with it at a more intellectual level rather than just this passive click next episode kind of thing. So yeah, that was one thing I wanted to say about that. And the other thing, particularly about Gesualdo, like, yeah, I agree. I made this parody episode 1, quote unquote, of the Gesualdo podcast. There's not going to be any more episodes.
I don't know. I listen.
But, well, what I'm going to say about that is just that there could be a 10 episode podcast about Gesualdo, because it does interact with a lot of things. We're talking about the early modern period here. So we're talking about the formation, the very foundations of the patriarchy. The fact that he was a noble, he was a prince. And because of that, his life was so documented. So, we could look at just like the very historiography of documentation. And then, of course, the reason that he's still so famous is because of the overlap between like this crazy crime that he committed, which was not really even considered a crime. He just got off the hook. Like it was sort of embarrassing for everybody involved. And they were just like, we're just going to leave this alone. And the place of women in the culture at that time and how that has changed and hasn't changed. Because a noblewoman had a certain amount of agency. Like his second wife could just ditch him and like live in her own castle with her other family. So I don't know. There's a lot of layers of the onion to peel in this story.
Yeah, and if I was working on this story, I'd probably immediately be attracted to and pull out the idea that when he murdered 2 people in this brutal, obvious way, no trial, covered up. And then like, oh, we suspect this friend of yours is a witch. And so we're going full trial. We're going like full witch trial, full inquisition. It's like, wait a sec. I think your priorities are okay, but why were their priorities so different than what ours would be today? That's interesting. That's historical. That's meaningful. And when you can use such a scintillating story, especially since he has fame. I think about this, especially in the dialogue that we see very freshly now with like a Gabby Petito about is it because she's like white and sort of famous and murdered in this terrible way? It's like, yeah, that's the way that culture works right now, is that you have to have these different elements. Like Gesualdo, famous, terrible murder, interesting historical stuff. He has the elements that make us interested in this.
So one thing that we talk about a fair amount in the world of the arts, classical music particularly these days, is this idea of programming as a zero-sum game. So like our very first episode of the podcast, we were talking about Beethoven's 250th anniversary and the fact that like he was going to get so much press, he was going to have so many concerts devoted to him. And then there's like a very vocal minority faction who like desperately wants to cancel Beethoven for committing the crime of writing music that too many people like. And then like, I don't know, you see these things where people really wanted to cancel Steve Reich because they found some quote that came out in a book in 1969 about something that he said about like African musicians and their relation to rhythm that, you know, struck people as sort of tone deaf. And yet I don't see anybody saying that like we shouldn't perform Gesualdo. Like, is there a statute of limitations on cancellation of this type? Should we not? I mean, he committed a heinous murder, and really a patriarchal murder and a misogynist murder. And because then he went on to like be a philanderer himself. I mean, there's a huge double standard. Like, should we accept that as part of our musical programming, or is it just too enticing not to listen to his stuff?
Okay. The question of whether to cancel a composer or not has dominated our discourse in the last, we'll say, 2 to 5 years. Let's go with something fairly narrow like that. And it's not that I'm buying into like rhetoric about cancel culture and so on, but I think there's a pretty vast gap in logic between what people choose to cancel and what they don't choose to cancel. And here we expose the root of it, which is that as long as we have enough layers between insulating us between us and what we disapprove of, then we're pretty okay with what's actually happening. And then, you know, on the flip side, as soon as something goes viral in the way that it is apt to do these days, then we can cancel it because people know about it now. And so there is a pretty large gap in logic for the way that we choose to cancel people today. The second thing I'll say is that there's also a fairly large gap between the two factions that you described, the faction of let's dominate all programming all year with Beethoven, and the faction of let's cancel Beethoven for being liked too much. And in fact, that chasm is where the majority of society actually lives. So nobody is canceling Beethoven, eye roll. And also, we have now been apprised as to the perniciousness of programming only Beethoven and over-programming. And that is the space in which I feel like the majority of us ought to live. It doesn't make sense to sort of swing too far in either direction for me.
Wow. So wait, are you saying that most people are not represented by my Twitter feed?
Yeah, I believe that is what I am saying, Will White.
Amazing.
How performed is Gesualdo?
I mean, he already lives in a realm of very specialized music, which is to say that only period choirs and ensembles are going to perform him, generally speaking, and like, you know, choral ensembles that are doing Renaissance surveys, for example. And I think where he might get a sense of overrepresentation is just for how weird his music was. I mean, like, that is the reason he gets included in curricula in schools. I mean, his music is representative of a harmonic language that was not really to be fully explored. And it's not like he started something, you know, if more people had followed in his footsteps and, you know, done things that the way that he was doing, then he might have a much even larger place in the music history curriculum. But as it was sort of like he was an aberration as far as that harmonic language was concerned. And so we have to mention him because it was so damn weird, but it's not like, I don't know if he's cancelable or not. That's a good point.
Well, it's also, I mean, I think a lot of the conversation around cancellation comes around like rewarding the living, like still living people. You know, should this person be allowed to have a career? Should they allowed to keep making money? Should they be allowed to, you know, but it's almost more esoteric when you're talking about should a choral group be allowed to make money off Gesualdo 400 plus years later, but because he did a bad thing. You know, it's not as obviously like point A to point B, we don't want this person to thrive and be happy anymore because they've done this cancelable thing. Like murder,
Yeah.
like double homicide.
Yeah, exactly. Don't you think that it would have been like the scariest thing in the world, like the most intense thing to be one of the musicians at Gesualdo's court at Venosa, or later in the town of Gesualdo. Like, here is this prince, right, who has all the money and resources available, and he's using it to, like, he had his own printing press, like in his basement, to print his music, which was very uncommon, right? You have to have a lot of money to be able to do that. And you're not only in his employ and you have to do what he says because he's the prince, but, like, you know that he's capable of killing somebody, right? And every day, this man wakes up and writes the weirdest stuff ever, like the creepiest music, and it's like, here, sing this today, you know? And you, like, have to do it. And it's like, yes, okay, Don Carlo. And I mean, just like, that must have been super intense to be one of the court singers at Venosa.
See, that's great. That's why the story is interesting. Going back to, like, why we tell these stories, because of those kind of historical hypotheticals.
Yeah, Gesualdo Part 2 has got to be Gili Bianco interviewing the musicians, right?
Yeah, I think maybe Gesualdo Part 2 would be after Gesualdo's death, when people are ready to go on the record and, you know, name names and talk a little bit about it. Well, we'll see. I don't know. Putting together Gesualdo the podcast, I mean, Caitlin, you know, you said that the true crime genre is so easy to parody, but this took me a long time. I don't know if we're going to be hearing Gesualdo Part 2 anytime soon.
Well, you know, there are, and I, you know, to be fair, I am not the expert on this, but I am vaguely aware of the kind of the true crime podcast that is the, like, step, 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 creak. I'm here, this place, which seems to take a ton of work. And then the sort of, like, women and wine and gabbing about like horrible murder.
Podcasts irritate me so much.
I wonder which podcast you're talking about.
Well, there's like 400. I'm not even shading anyone. It's like the largest genre on iTunes, I think.
Well, stay tuned. This classical Spookfest has a very long production cycle, so I think there's time to delve in if you want to.
Yeah, we'll think about it. We'll figure out something for next year. Who knows? Anyway, Caitlin, it's been amazing. Thank you so much. But before we let you go, you know what we want from you, the spookiest thing of all, to stick around and recommend something for our classical mixtape.
Ooh.
In our classical mixtape, we each recommend some music that's caught our ear this week to share with our listeners. So, Caitlin, what do you have this week?
I've selected for you this week, to follow several themes from the episode, Berlioz's Symphonie fantastique, Dream of a Witch's Sabbath.
Yes.
Not only to connect it to the idea of witchcraft, but also I found the story behind this particularly interesting, which was that there was a Shakespearean actress that Berlioz was deeply, deeply obsessed with. And she, of course, rejected him, and I believe was having relations with her own manager and just was not into this kind of random composer. But then he created this whole work. And at a certain point, she was like, this guy is so obsessed to me, I'm kind of into it. Which like, you know, to be a muse is a great thing for one's ego, possibly also a little toxic. But I also just really love this piece. I think it's delightful and spooky and strange and perfect for the season.
This is great. This is a classic of the spooky classical genre for sure. And to go just a little bit deeper, I mean, talk about an onion with many layers to peel back. So Berlioz wrote his own story for the symphony, and each movement is like a different episode in this, and that's a big reason why people love it. But the story behind this movement, the nuit du Sabbat, the night of the Sabbath, of the witches, like all around, it's not just like an authentic, literal depiction of witches. The story, as he wrote it, is that the artist, who is him, overdoses on opium, and this is the OD moment.
And the head witch who is revealed to him in the bacchanal of the Sabbath is the Shakespearean actress who he was obsessed with.
Yes.
So she comes to him and is like, "Hello, it is me, the head witch," which again, doesn't feel super flattering to me. But I guess you can see romance wherever you wish to see it, I suppose.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Caitlin. Anything you'd like to add before you leave us today?
I would like to give a spooky shout out to Stephanie Doughty, my mother, and biggest fan of your podcast.
Aww.
Yeah, we're big fans of Steph here. We got to get her on the show at some point. We had sort of hoped to do a tag team this time, but it didn't quite work out. But yeah, ever since Caitlin's first appearance on the Spookfest last year, Steph has become a regular listener.
Yes, and she has she'll drop biographical details, what you're all up to, how she wasn't sure about Kensho's move, she hopes it's okay. She's deep.
Goodness.
She's deep into the cinematic universe
Fandom
of the Gabfest.
We love it. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming back, Caitlin, and Steph. Thanks so much for your listenership. We love it.
Absolutely.
Happy Halloween.
Let's go to Kensho for our next mixtape recommendation.
All right, so of course, it's Halloween and we're looking for some spooky music. And I just distinctly remembered actually hearing something that was quite atmospheric and maybe appropriate for this. And it comes from my friend Hannah Collins' new album called Resonance Lines. And in that album, she performs a piece by Kaija Saariaho called 7 Papillons. And I recommend everybody to listen to the whole piece, but here the first track is my classical mixtape recommendation.
Seven Papillons. Those are little butterflies. What could be scary about little butterflies?
Well, it's like fluttery, atmospheric music that could be spooky,
Yeah, they're more like moths in this piece, I would say.
I used to be pretty scared of butterflies, actually. And that was mostly because I knew that they came from caterpillars, which I hated as a kid. Let's go to Will for the next recommendation.
All right, this recommendation, this comes from a really dark corner of YouTube, and I just mean dark as in nobody knows about it. This is a YouTube channel that's called Early Music in a Different Way. And it's this Brazilian guy, Eduardo Antonello, who plays many different instruments. He plays viols, he plays harpsichord, he plays crumb horns, he plays all of this stuff. And he wrote this piece. This is an original composition that he did. It's called The Black Plague's Dance for Renaissance Ensemble. And he is playing all of the instruments, overdubbing himself several times on a variety of things. And I don't know, the video is kind of spooky. It's just great, though. I love the music. It's very fun.
Okay, if I had been able to compile my own, 23 most terrifying things to tell, I guess I'll say a violinist. My number one would have been, okay, you're into Sub tomorrow night. The whole program's Harry Potter. For anyone who doesn't quite know why this is a terrifying thing to go through, the Harry Potter music is so hard. It has so many dang notes for violins. It's very unreasonable, actually. And as it so happens, I am actually performing on an all Harry Potter concert this weekend.
Oh boy.
So I'm just now breaking into, and just so you know, everyone, while the celeste is nicely doing bum bum ba bum beam bum bum bum, you have 8 notes per note of that in the violins in extremely non-intuitive, I won't even say patterns. They're just notes. And it all sounds very magical if you zoom out a lot. But anyway, here's Hedwig's theme. You'll find the links to all these and to our full classical mixtape playlist in the show notes.
And with that, it's time to wrap up this episode of the Classical Spookfest. I'm Willy's White, and on behalf of Tiffany Boo and Kensho Watanabe, I'd like to thank you so much for listening and to encourage you to subscribe and rate us on your podcast app. We'd also love your help spreading the word about the show on social media, where you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can reach us at classicalgabfest@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, scary listening, and we'll be with you next week.